There's something we rely on every single second of every day, but almost never actually think about. And that thing is measurement. It's like this invisible architecture holding our entire world together, from the bridge you drive over to the price of your coffee. But as we're about to see, getting that measurement right, well, that's a constant and honestly a fascinating struggle.
So let's just start with a really basic question. How do you know that playground slide is actually safe for your kids, or that the pound of ground beef you just bought at the store actually weighs a pound? In a world this complex, how do we trust, well, anything?
The answer, it turns out, is incredibly simple but also really profound. We trust because we measure. We create these yardsticks. Some are microscopic, some are economic, but they all serve to bring some kind of order and fairness to the chaos. It's probably our single best tool for making sense of reality. So in this explainer, we're going to look at this idea from two totally different angles. We'll kick things off by measuring the decay of physical stuff and the hidden things it emits. Then we're going to pivot to how we measure fairness in the marketplace and the strain that system is under. Finally, we'll see how these two worlds connect and ask, what are the things we still can't measure? Let's get into it.
All right, first up, the physical world. I mean, we are surrounded by plastics, right? Park benches, car parts, you name it. We kind of expect them to last forever, but the truth is, they are all in this constant, slow-motion state of collapse. And the huge challenge for scientists is figuring out exactly how to measure that decay.
The main culprit here is a process called photodegradation. The easiest way to think about it is like a four-pronged attack. You've got sunlight, air, heat, and moisture, all working together to break down the very chemical chains that hold materials like plastic together in the first place.
And you've totally seen the results of this everywhere, even if you didn't have a fancy name for it. It's the reason your plastic lawn chairs get brittle and snap. It's why the color on that old billboard is all faded, and it's why that playground equipment gets those tiny little surface cracks. The material is literally losing its strength right before our eyes.
So how in the world do scientists actually measure this? I mean, they can't just guess. They need a really precise tool. And one of those tools is called the carbonyl index. You should think of this as their yardstick. It doesn't measure inches or feet. It measures chemical decay. It turns a fuzzy, slow process into a hard number that they can actually track over time. And this brings us to a number that is genuinely shocking. Get this. In one study, some of that bioplastic cutlery, the kind you get with your takeout salad, lost half of its tensile strength after just 15 minutes of UV exposure. And tensile strength is just a fancy way of saying how much you can pull something before it breaks. 15 minutes? This isn't some process that takes decades. It starts happening the moment that stuff hits the sun. But, things like losing strength or fading color, that's really only half the story. The physical decay of plastic is creating another threat, one that's even more serious and completely invisible. Think about it. When those long polymer chains break apart, the plastic doesn't just, poof, vanish into thin air. It has to go somewhere. The material is actually transforming. So the big question is, what is it transforming into? It's releasing something called volatile organic compounds, or VOCs for short. These are tiny airborne chemicals that can be pretty toxic. So as plastics break down, they're basically leaking these compounds into the air that we all breathe. The big takeaway here is that a decaying park bench isn't just an eyesore, it's an active source of chemical pollution. And here's the problem. Scientists know this is happening, but they don't really know the full extent of it. The source material for this actually says there's a critical gap in our knowledge. We are still in the very early days of figuring out how to accurately measure these invisible emissions. And this table here really shows why that gap is so darn hard to close. It turns out there's no single perfect tool for the job. You've got one method, GCMS, think of it like a chemical fingerprint scanner, that's super sensitive, but it's also really complex and can miss certain things. Then another method is more eco-friendly, but it's not as sensitive. Every single option involves a trade-off, which means scientists are basically trying to build a complete picture of a really complex problem using an imperfect set of tools. Okay, so now we are going to do a complete 180. We're going to pivot from the world of chemistry to the world of commerce. How do we make sure things are fair when we buy stuff? How do we trust that a gallon is really a gallon and a pound is really a pound? The stakes here are just astronomical. Way back in 2005, this system already governed $4.5 trillion in US transactions. That was more than half the GDP at the time. I mean, can you imagine what that number is today with e-commerce and digital payments and everything else? This isn't some small niche issue. It is the absolute bedrock of our entire economy. And hey, this isn't a new concern. Over 100 years ago, Governor Curtis Guild put it perfectly. Unlike other issues that might affect you once in a while, honest measurement is constant. It touches every single purchase you make, from the gas in your car to the groceries on your table. Now, this system of trust that we all take for granted, it didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was built piece by painful piece over 100 years by dedicated, and let's be honest, largely unsung organizations like the National Conference on Weights and Measures. These are the folks who create the rule books that try to ensure a level playing field for everyone. But here's the conflict. This vital system, which was designed for a much simpler time, is now creaking and groaning under the pressure of the modern world. Just take a look at this. Even a simple scale at the deli counter has to go through an incredibly complex certification process called the National Type Evaluation Program, or NTEP. This is all to make sure it's accurate and can't be easily tampered with. Now, just imagine trying to apply that same level of rigor to thousands of new, super complex devices every single year. A P report from 2005 laid out these challenges, and they've only gotten worse. Technology is evolving way faster than the regulations can keep up. The equipment gets more complex every day, from smart gas pumps to self-checkout scales. And all of this is happening while budgets are shrinking and experienced staff are retiring. It's really a perfect storm that's threatening to undermine this entire system of trust we rely on. So this brings us right back to our yardstick metaphor, doesn't it? Whether we're talking about a chemical index for plastic or a deli scale for cheese, the challenge is exactly the same. Keeping that yardstick accurate and relevant is a constant, uphill battle against the forces of change and complexity. So let's bring it all home. We've looked at two very, very different worlds, material science and economic regulation, but what's wild is that they're telling the exact same story. When you put it side by side, it's pretty incredible. On one hand, you have scientists in a race against time to invent new yardsticks to measure invisible chemical threats. And on the other, you have regulators struggling to maintain a century-old yardstick of trust against relentless technological and economic pressure. At the end of the day, both are battles against decay, against complexity, and against the unknown. And winning them is absolutely essential for our health, our wallets, and just for a fair functioning society. And this brings us to our final, and maybe our biggest, question. We've seen the struggle to measure things we can see, like a plastic bench, and things we can't, like airborne chemicals. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. The truly hard questions are about the things we haven't even agreed on how to measure yet. How do you quantify the long-term societal impact of a new technology? Or the real value of an old-growth forest? Or even something like happiness? So I'll leave you with this to chew on. What is the most important thing in your life, in your work, or in our society that we haven't even started to measure yet?